From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Tuesday, November 11, 2025. 50 years ago today, an Australian Governor-General sacked the Prime Minister. A new book reveals something about Gough Whitlam's character that might explain why the PM didn't see the ambush coming. And today, The Australian's own Troy Bramston joins us to explain who Whitlam really was and why the dismissal couldn't happen today. The Australian's also publishing today on YouTube a documentary about our own editor-at-large, Paul Kelly's unique take on the dismissal, a story that cost him his job. Paul came back and, for the first time in our doco, reveals how his principled reporting shaped the future of his career. Check it out by searching Power and Principle on YouTube. It's November 11, an incredibly important day for anyone who's interested in Australian politics because 50 years ago, the Whitlam government was dismissed by Governor-General John Kerr.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
That event still reverberates through all Australian affairs. And joining me today is Troy Bramston, a senior writer with The Australian, who, in the research for his new book, Gough Whitlam, The Vista of the New, has dug up some stuff we didn't know about the events of November 11, 1975. Troy, what have you found out?
Hi, Claire. Look, this was the most dramatic, convulsive moment for our politics. It split the nation, and we're still talking about it 50 years later. I tried to talk to a lot of people who were there. I tried to get their different vantage points on the day and the crisis and the lead up to it. But what really struck me was just at the start of this year, as I was finishing the book, I got access to John Kerr's handwritten notes written in the years just before he died in March 1991. And Kerr had become a lonely and I think tragic figure, and the notes show that. He's constantly revisiting the crisis, analysing the characters of Whitlam and Fraser and his own decisions, and he becomes a little bit delusional. He seems to think that it was his destiny to dismiss the Whitlam government. It was the forces of history were pushing him into it, and he comes to really dislike Whitlam and Fraser. He says that they had made him their scapegoat, and the public opposition to him and the attacks that he faced in the years later had a big impact on him. So it's a really revealing insight into the psychological impact for the man who did it.
And this is the last time that I will be saying this. Cheers from a small minority. However, life is wonderful for all of us, especially winners of the Melbourne Cup. Congratulations to all.
It's an interesting way to frame it, isn't it? Because John Kerr was a Labor-appointed Governor-General. He was a lawyer who, as it turned out, had some pretty strong views about what his abilities were as Governor-General, things that people perhaps didn't expect that a Governor-General might think they were allowed to do, including dismiss the government. But he frames it in those notes that you're talking about as kind of that he didn't have a choice, that, destiny was calling him. What do you think about that?
Yeah, John Kerr described his role as a constitutional umpire, as if he's between two men sitting in judgment like he was the New South Wales Chief Justice again, which he'd been before he's Governor-General. In actual fact, his role is to be a constitutional guardian. And there are some very important protocols and traditions around the role that, yes, there are reserved powers, but they should only be exercised as a last resort when there's no other alternative way, and they should not be exercised without warning. I don't think Gough Whitlam really knew who John Kerr was. As you say, he'd been a Labor guy. But one of the other things I've discovered is some oral history interviews he gave and other notes where by 1974 when he's appointed, he's really almost anti-Labor. He's identifying with the Liberal Party. He actually once dreamed of being a Liberal Party Prime Minister. I don't think Gough knew this. And so one of the themes of the book is that Gough is very naive. He has these blind spots. He's not good at reading people's characters. And so in the lead up to the dismissal, there are so many people that tell Gough you can't trust Kerr. That's the one thing. So his advisor, Elizabeth Reid, on women's affairs, New South Wales MP Clive Evatt, the famous painter Clifton Pugh, Bill Hayden, who was the treasurer, they're saying, be careful here. Are you sure you can trust him? And then, of course, the public servants are telling him in memo after memo after memo that there is a dismissal risk here. You need to think about how this gridlock, this crisis could be resolved. And he was just blind to all of that.
Gough Whitlam was a charismatic and kind of captivating individual, and that's probably why every generation of uni students falls in love with Gough all over again. You know, he's so different from other politicians of that era, and politicians now, I would argue.
So must Sir John Kerr accept your advice, whatever advice you give?
Unquestionably, the Governor-General takes the advice from his Prime Minister and from no one else.
And must act on that advice?
Unquestionably, the Governor-General must act on the advice of his Prime Minister.
There is no tolerance here. He must
None whatever.
But you portray him in the book, in the extracts that I've read, as really someone who was not at all in his private life this ebullient kind of charismatic figure who we've come to know more of, a bit of a shy introvert. Was that a surprise to you?
Look, it was. I mean, I sort of always knew it was there, but I was surprised when I went back and looked at it. He is a loner. He followed his own star. He didn't have that many friends. He didn't confide in his colleagues. And so this is a character flaw for a Prime Minister that's got to be able to run a cabinet. He wasn't very collegiate in cabinet, and he's got to run a party. And he's not very consultative or cooperative with his party. So he's very much that person. He's very sort of isolated from a lot of his colleagues during the Whitlam government. And I found that this character trait was evident as early as he's being at school. His school reports and university journals say things like he's a very intelligent man, someone who would no doubt do big things in life, but he has this flaw where he doesn't really get on well with people. He doesn't have many friends. He's a bit of a loner. He has a difficulty in how he relates to people. And so that is really what shapes the Whitlam government. You know, I do argue that it did leave a towering legacy of achievements in health and urban affairs and universities and schools and legal reforms. I mean, all these things we know about and they're big, but the government was also chaotic, scandalous, dysfunctional, disorganised, and a lot of that comes from Whitlam the man and this flaw in his nature.
Some of those flaws were embarrassing, you know, soliciting loans from dodgy moneylenders in Pakistan, ministers being very open about at least flirtation, if not affairs, with members of staff. It was really tacky and seemed at odds with the much more lofty persona of Gough himself. That introversion and difficulty with others, do you think it stopped him from identifying that some of his ministers were unsuitable, or stopped him from being able to pull them up and say, hey, this is not how you behave?
Yeah, look, he didn't like confrontation. He found it very difficult to sack ministers, although he did do that, but only right at the end, people like Clyde Cameron and Jim Cairns and Rex Connor. So he had a difficulty in that and how he managed it. But, you know, for a lot of people, Whitlam did carry the light for a new post-war generation. And you asked earlier, Claire, about, you know, why does new generations continue to sort of look to him and be interested in him and in many ways inspired by him? It's because he was a politician who did have courage and he did have a vision and he did leave a big record of achievements. But there is this flaw all the way through. And, you know, he didn't pay a lot of attention to the economy or the budget. He just steamrolled this agenda through. And so in, you know, about 1,000 days, they did so much, and it's often because they're just bulldozing their way through government. And so the Hawke and Keating governments and subsequent governments, including Anthony Albanese, who launched the book and said this, that you've got to also be able to run a government. You've got to stage your policy reforms. You've got to win public support for them. You've got to pace yourself. You've got to be collegiate. You've got to have proper processes. You've got to respect the public service and seek alternative views. So Gough didn't do any of that. But his successors, the good ones, have, I think, the most effective ones have learnt that lesson.
In The Australian, you've revealed that our present Governor-General, Sam Mostyn, also appointed by a Labor government, has her own thoughts about the dismissal. What did she say?
This was really interesting, Claire. I sat down with her in the Governor-General study where John Kerr dismissed Gough Whitlam 50 years ago. So we're sitting right there, and it was very evident to both of us that we're talking about these things. I spoke to her quite at length. I can't recall a previous Governor-General being so open and so frank about what happened in 1975. So she revealed that it's very much on her mind. She's thinking about it. She thought about it when she accepted the role a few years ago, about how she would operate. And she told me quite clearly she would not have done what John Kerr did. And the essential problem with what John Kerr did was that he exercised these dramatic, convulsive, reserve powers without warning. He didn't confide in his Prime Minister. He didn't say, hey, there's some problems here. We need another way through this crisis. Give me some other options. Let's talk about it. And she said to me, which is what the palace had said to John Kerr, the benefit of these powers is that you have them and you might refer to them, but you don't ever really use them. You use the threat of these powers to procure a different resolution short of a dramatic intervention. And the Crown doesn't want to intervene in politics. They don't want to be controversial. That damages the Crown. And I think it's quite clear that the palace had that view as well. They would never have done this in the UK because it would jeopardise their own future and standing if we thought that the Crown was dramatically intervening in democratic politics.
So it's more like, if you guys don't stop fighting, I'm going to turn this car around and we're not going on the holiday.
Absolutely. It's kind of the, speak softly and carry a big stick approach. That's what it is. And so she's learnt that lesson. She's done the research. She's read, Anne Toomey's great book, The Veiled Sceptre, about these relationships and about the Westminster tradition. She's thought about Kerr. She's talked to lawyers. So she's really interested in it. And, there are other things too. Like she said, she would never consult the Chief Justice of the High Court because this could be a justiciable matter. So she'd consult only the Solicitor General. And she was very clear to me that, there's this famous formulation by Walter Bagehot, who's the English writer, who says a Governor-General or a monarch has the opportunity to be consulted and to counsel and warn. And so that's very much in her thinking about how to operate as Governor-General. And so she said it wouldn't happen today because she wouldn't allow a crisis to develop where she hadn't talked frankly to the Prime Minister and said we need to find a solution here.
Coming up, does Malcolm Fraser get a fair telling in the story of the dismissal? The huge drama of that day really never ended for those three principal players, John Kerr, Gough Whitlam and Malcolm Fraser. We talked about how uni students fall in love with Gough Whitlam, but I wonder if Fraser gets a bit ignored and, how you reflect on Fraser, the man, now having done all this research for this book.
Look, it's really interesting, Claire. One of the discoveries in the book is that Malcolm Fraser had written a draft obituary for Gough Whitlam that he had finalised and annotated and made edits to, but decided not to publish it. And in that draft obituary, what he said was that he had come now to the view, after all these years, that what John Kerr did was wrong in the sense that he should have warned Gough Whitlam first, exactly what we've been talking about. He said Kerr should have spoken more freely to him. So Malcolm Fraser, changed his views on a lot of things, but not on the dismissal. He thought it was right to push the political system to the brink, to terminate the Whitlam government. That's what he wanted to do, and he always maintained that was the right thing to do. But he had changed his mind about that issue of warning. So we're seeing history's judgment now, 50 years, come down very heavily on John Kerr. Not that he didn't have the powers or that the Senate couldn't block supply or that Whitlam should have been able to continue without supply. It's how the dismissal was done, the actual technical nature of it without that warning. But just more broadly, look, Gough Whitlam said to me and he said to others that he wanted to be remembered as an achiever, not as a martyr. So the dismissal was obviously not a good outcome for him. His government was cut short, and so he's always going to be snap frozen in time through the prism of the dismissal. Malcolm Fraser, his colleagues Andrew Peacock and John Howard said to me, he became a bit cautious, a bit timid in government. He was very aware of the forces that he had unleashed and the public reaction. So I think he was a bit scarred by it as well. And as we were talking, John Kerr was haunted by it. He never really got over it and he lived a lot of time abroad. So when we look back, I think after 50 years, it was a train wreck for our democracy. It was bad for our institutions, and the three principal characters involved, none of them are heroes. It all affected them negatively.
Troy Bramston's book, Gough Whitlam, The Vista of the New, is published by HarperCollins Australia and is out now. You can check out all our reporting on this 50th anniversary right now at theaustralian.com.au.